Hey, everybody, welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we are honored by a very special guest, and that is Mr. Dean Radin, who is the author of many excellent books, some of the best books written on psychic research, in my opinion, such as The Conscious Universe, Entangled Minds, Supernormal, and I believe his newest book is Real Magic. So welcome on, Dean.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it's again, it's an honor to have you on because, like as I was saying before, I probably read my first Dean Radin book something like 13 years ago, and was fascinated to discover that there was actual science being done on psychic research. So, how did that begin for you?
It began when I was about 12, I think. The librarian at the library that I used to go to as a kid noticed that I was taking out a lot of books on science fiction and fairy tales and mythology and that sort of thing, like kids do. And she said, "Oh, you're interested in these things. You might be interested in this too." And it happened to be a book on parapsychology. And that really caught my attention because even as a kid, I was interested in science. And now I saw that there was a way that you could study some of the more interesting aspects of what you see in science fiction and fairy tales, namely psychic phenomena. There's actually a science that applies to it. So you can see then that it was the combination of the fascination that kids have, like they do with Harry Potter, and immediately start wondering, is this magic stuff for real? Well, here's a scientific discipline that actually studies that question. So that's what caught my attention.
Yeah, and so you have a early interest in psychic phenomenon, and do you remember when your first involvement officially as a scientist into psychic phenomenon?
I suppose it depends what you mean by officially. So
Yeah,
I was doing
yeah.
experiments in college as an undergraduate and also in graduate school. I suppose maybe officially is the first time I had a publication when I was working at Bell Laboratories. So that, I suppose, that was part of it. The other part was learning that there were professional associations of scientists and scholars interested in these things and joining the Parapsychological Association, which is the professional organization. So that was about 1980, I think.
And so when you started to both officially and unofficially get involved, and I guess you can say in a pretty serious way, was there anything that initially surprised you in any way?
Well, since I had already been working in Bell Labs for a while, which at the time was, I think, the largest science and technology organization in the world. The lab had 50,000 employees, all scientists and technicians. So I had a pretty good idea of what big science was like. You can put a lot of smart people together with a lot of equipment, and you can do very interesting things. And so I suppose what surprised me is that the kind of science that was being done, in this case, mostly telecommunications, but also physics and a few other areas, it's the same kind of science. They're scientific methods that can be used to study anything. And so the same methods are being used to study psychic phenomena and finding interesting results. So from a lay perspective, why is this so interesting? Well, when you go through a scientific curriculum in school, you might be in school for 8 years, 10 years past high school, you're never taught about these phenomena. And if you happen to run across it, you'll run across it in a dismissive way, saying that these are ancient superstitions, only uneducated people believe in these things, and so on. So it was an eye-opener to find that the best science applied, as in any field, was being applied to these areas and finding interesting results, suggesting that psychic phenomena actually exist. So that's practically shocking from the point of view of conventional science, because, as I said, you're either taught to ignore it or to dismiss it as though there's nothing there, but that's wrong.
In that instance, particularly with Bell Laboratories, What kind of psychic phenomenon were they looking into specifically?
Well, they was me.
Oh, you.
There
So,
was no
yeah.
program at Bell Labs.
Yeah.
I was looking at interaction between mind and matter. And I was able to sell that essentially to my management, because one of the projects that I was working on, or at least within the group that I was in, was understanding why triple redundant machines fail. So as you probably know, this telephone switching network then and still now is all computers. The computers are designed so they basically never fail, because we're used to picking up the phone dialing and it just works somehow. Well, behind the scenes, there's an enormous network of computers that are controlling the whole thing. And if one of those computers goes down in the wrong place, there's fancy algorithms that will reroute you to other computers. So it seems like it never goes down. Sometimes it does go down. And so it becomes really important to figure out why. And so I think we understand maybe 95% of reasons why things fail, even triple redundant systems, but there's always 5% left over. So I said, well, maybe the 5% left over has something to do with the interaction with humans and the machines. We're influencing it in some way. Well, why would you think that? Well, because there's this whole literature showing that there are psychokinetic effects. They're not gigantic effects typically, but they're there. And there's also a huge ton of anecdotes where people become upset and like they really need this copy right now for the copy machine. They go there and then it just doesn't work. So this is part of Murphy's Law. When things will fail at the worst possible time.
I've been there.
So it's so common that I said, well, maybe there's something there and we should look at it. So that's essentially how I got permission to start publishing, or actually spending a little bit of time to do that kind of work. And as I found pretty quickly, most people, even at the labs, were very interested in these things. It wasn't part of any program, but we had enough free time at work to do whatever we wanted to. And that's how I got permission to do it. I also learned that even at Bell Labs, there were some people who were very religious and absolutely wanted nothing to do with it because it was the work of the devil. So this, you see, still persists everywhere, that people from a religious faith, especially from the Catholic perspective, the catechism says this is magic, and magic is bad unless it's magic done within the bounds of the church, and then it's okay.
Yeah. Well, and it's actually funny, or not funny, really, fortunate that the UFO subject has the same kind of stigma attached, where even Lou Elizondo, who was the head of the ATIP program, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, while he was pursuing this, and they had real-time data, he was told basically back off, because, and it was this kind of same religious fundamentalism that was basically interfering with national security, as crazy as that sounds. So it's that same kind of stigma exists, I guess you can say, in the UAP subject, and even the study of it.
It is true throughout the entire government and military.
Yeah. So actually, you were actually speaking about some of the Catholics or Catholicism, fundamentalism. You were recently involved in something with psychic phenomenon and genetics.
Mm-hmm.
So can you explain what that is about?
There's folklore in every culture in the world that some families seem to be psychically talented. So we decided to put that to the test. The only other study of its kind that we could find was done in the early 1990s. I happened to be at the University of Edinburgh at the time in Scotland. And one of the students was doing her dissertation on the Scottish lore of second sight. That's what they called it. So in the Scottish Highlands, some families were known for having this precognitive or clairvoyant ability. They called second sight. So she did a hereditability study to see if, first of all, who had these abilities, and I mean, they're claimed abilities anyway, And did it pass down through generations? And to make a long story short, she found, yeah, that it seemed to be something that could be inherited. So years passed, early 90s to middle 2000s, where we decided to use the modern tools of genetics to look at the DNA and see if we could find a difference between people who are talented from talented families and not exactly not talented, but people who did not claim to be psychic and were not from psychic families. So the first thing we did was we did a worldwide survey to find people who thought they were psychic from psychic families. We found 3,000 candidates. We did a very rigorous sequence of steps to narrow it down to people who we had vetted for actual talent, that we were reasonably sure they weren't psychotic, and that they had some talent. We gave them some tests and were willing to give us their DNA. So we ended up with a small group like that. And then they all turned out to be women, that's who we ended up with. And then we needed to find gender, age, and race matched controls, people who never reported anything psychic and so on. That was much more difficult to find. We needed to find the same number of women, but the same ages, same races. It took forever to find them, which actually matches what we later learned, that if you ask people what they believe, then something like 60% of the world's population, plus or minus a little bit, believe in these kinds of effects. If you ask the question slightly differently, and you ask what have people experienced, not what they believe, but what have you actually experienced? And you don't use psychic terms, you use descriptions of experiences like the feeling of being stared at. Then you get way over 90%. So while people in the surveys, specialists know about this, the way you ask a question is really critical, because people will interpret it in certain ways and try to outguess what you want to know and so on. You ask about actual experience, you get a different kind of answer. And that's what we were interested in. So from those studies, we learned why it was so difficult to find controls. Because if you ask somebody, have you ever experienced anything like these things? The vast majority of people will say yes. And by the way, the same is true of scientists and engineers. They'll also say yes, way over 90%. So anyway, so we got the DNA. We did ways of comparing the genomes to look for, is there any difference between the two? And we found that there is a difference, but it was not in the direction that we thought. What we thought was we would find that the psychics from psychic families are X-men. In other words, mutations.
Yeah.
We found the opposite. We found that the mutations were people who never report anything psychic and don't come from families who never report it either. So the so-called wild type person is the psychic. And the wild type is the vast majority of people out there, or the quote, natural genetics. But there are a lot of people who also have various kinds of mutations, and the mutations are the ones who have no psychic ability at all.
Do you know what causes those mutations?
Well, there's a million reasons why there are mutations. Okay. I mean, some father or mother could be hit by a cosmic ray, which slightly changes their chromosomes, and that gets passed on. So, I mean, hardly anybody is truly the full wild type. There's hundreds and hundreds of variations. Most of them don't matter. Like in the case of the psychic ability, people, you're in trouble typically if you have a mutation in the exome part of the DNA. That's the part that codes for protein, because we're made up of proteins. But that's only 5% of your DNA. 95% of it is called the intron sequence. It's intron because it's between the coding pieces, but it's 95% of DNA. For a long time, people had no idea what it did. So they called it junk DNA. Well, it's not, now we know better. It's not junk. It's part of the epigenetic system, which turns genes on and off. So if you have, by virtue of being exposed to something in the world, your experiences, whatever, training, learning, all of these epigenetic switches are basically there ready to do something. So for the wild type, we have an epigenetic switch which apparently is modulating the way certain genes work, which make us psychically receptive. But the mutations in this case, the controls, don't have that switch. They have a different kind of switch that apparently does not turn on their ability to be receptive to psychic experiences. So this is just one thing that we found. There are a lot of other methods that we can use and we will use, but they were more expensive than we had in our budget. So we haven't been able to look at the entire intron sequence, and we expect we probably will find other things that are different about the controls and the psychics.
So this study is continuing?
If we can raise the money.
Right.
So research is always about money. It's easy to come up with ideas, but whether you can fund it or not is another issue. So for our next step on this, we need about $500,000. And the vast majority of that is simply to sequence the DNA and to do the analyses.
Have you ever worked or spoken with Dr. Gary Nolan about this kind of work?
I did. In fact, it was Gary and I speaking about this, which launched this project.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Gary, he's awesome. He's an awesome dude, man.
Yeah.
Did you guys ever talk about the work on the caudate nucleus or the caudate putamen?
We did. Yes. And that is the link to UFOs and the link to a whole bunch of strange stuff. And in fact, it was because of the morphological change, the fiber tracks in that particular area of the brain, that gave Gary the idea that there must be a genetic component, partially because that structure is found in family members and it's bilateral, so it's not a lesion, it's not a mistake, it's something that's there. So that was the origin for wanting to do this as a genetic test using modern genetic tools. And of course, once you start that, if we get a large enough database, we can learn an enormous amount. We would need thousands of cases, both controls and cases, but that would cost multiple millions of dollars. So at some point, somebody's going to find some value in this. And we're already thinking ahead of if, as we said, even in our original proposal to raise the little bits of money that we were able to raise, if we can find the genetics that leads to psychic talent, because it's a lot more than what we found in our first study, then we are pretty good at genetic engineering at this point. We can probably create a way to enhance people's psychic abilities or to suppress it if it turns out for some reason that they don't want it. Yeah. So if you follow along this line of thinking, you end up with the scenario of the Wrath of Khan from Star Trek. Yeah. We're talking about augmented humans.
Yeah.
With special abilities.
Metahumans.
So, metahumans. Yeah. We don't have to wait around for X-Men. We'll just make them.
Yeah. Seriously. That's incredible to even consider.
It also is very scary.
It is.
So the scary part is the ethics of mucking about with humans, and especially making enhanced humans. But I think the likelihood is extremely high that is already happening.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remember hearing, I don't want to say which country, but experiments with CRISPR and the ethical issues that was posing. That's just, I mean, again, it's like one of those things to me, like artificial intelligence, which is both fascinating and frightening, but nonetheless, that's the world that we're in 2021.
Well, it's always been, every time a new power has been invented, well, everything from gunpowder all the way up to nuclear weapons or nuclear power, it can be used for good or bad, right? Yeah. So the power is neutral. It's up to us how we're going to use it. So the same is true for genetic engineering. We could make new people. We can do it. Yeah. How we do that is an issue to discuss. How do we do it?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's actually, I wrote one of the original articles on the caudate nucleus with Gary. I actually followed that story pretty closely. And from what I understand, it's going pretty good, right?
Not quite sure what you mean by going pretty good.
I think that there's going to be follow-up on that.
Probably, yes.
Yeah. But moving on to, let's say, we were just talking about technology. So has there ever been that you know of, even rudimentary or kind of trial forms or ideas to involve technology to enhance psychic capabilities?
Well, there are a lot of claims for how to do that. So they include, of course, meditation. There's age-old lore about meditation and psychic ability. And we did a survey once among beginning meditators to ask if they had encountered different kinds of effects that would be called psychic, and something like 75% said yes.
Yeah.
So there's some reason to believe that the ancient lore is probably correct. Likewise, psychedelics will do that, some psychedelics. There are people who might use hemisync or other kinds of binaural beat methods. Yeah. So most, and now even some ideas about maybe transcranial ultrasound and transcranial repetitive magnetic stimulation, all of these brain stimulation methods that are also possible.
Do you think that's something that there's going to be like like you were saying, like the ultrasound one? You think that's a strong possibility that something like that could actually work? Or is it speculative?
And no, all of it is speculative at this point. The one thing we know about psychic ability is that the worst possible state for it to work is the ordinary waking consciousness. So the reason I think why meditation and drugs and drumming and dancing and all of that stuff, the reason why that works is because we're not in an ordinary state of awareness. Yeah. So the moment you begin to drop that, this is mostly frontal lobe stuff. When you begin to drop it, it seems as though our sensitivity to these other domains increases simply is there. And even in an experimental sense, we've done a huge number of experiments, not just me, but our field, to look at what might be considered noise reduction techniques, which again is like meditation, but also Ganzfeld condition, all the different experimental methods that are used to create a kind of sensory deprivation. They are way better than ordinary state. So if you sit somebody down off the street and just say, here, do this experiment, that's not going to work very well. If you take that random person, I call them Joe Sixpack. You take Joe Sixpack, sit them down, and then do something. If they don't know how to meditate, give them a psychedelic, have them do a guided meditation, do something to get them out of their ordinary state, and then they do much, much better.
Yeah. I think for people that really don't have an introduction into meditation, if the listeners are interested in that, I would highly recommend you check out Dean's book, Super Normal, and I'll leave a link in the description. That's a fascinating book, which goes into the meditation and consciousness and psychic phenomenon. I think like nowadays, a lot of people are familiar and comfortable with there's now apps that have like the binaurals, hemisync, or that kind of meditation music and guided meditations. It's actually something like popular now. So that's, I mean, at least there's more of that around. Yeah. Now, in all your research, what kind of different, I guess you can say, ESP applications were looked at? Like, for example, like remote viewing, clairvoyance. You mentioned PK or, psychokinetic or telekinesis. Well, psychokinetic. Have you looked at or at least officially tested different modes of psychic phenomenon?
Well, as far as applications go, probably the best known was psychic espionage. Yeah. So which has been used and probably continue to be used. Another one is, I can show you in a book here. Here's a gigantic book.
Oh my God.
This is making money in stocks and sports games and whatever. It's a it's a large size book. It's like 700 pages. So it's these are the authors.
All right. Yeah, I'll link that. That looks awesome.
So associative remote viewing is was developed quite a while ago, but the idea is that if you can gain any information about the future at all, even in a binary sense, it's, you know, a stock will go up or down, then you in principle could use it to make money.
Yeah.
Same with sports betting and anything else, things that are unpredictable from the future. Well, so that is the technique that uses this clairvoyant capacity to see what's coming and use it to make decisions before the event occurs. So that gigantic book goes through the history of it and the techniques and so on and the success. It's very clear at this point. A meta-analysis has been done to show that in a 50% game, whatever it happens to be, the 50% game that you generally with this method, associative remote viewing, can, even without super talented remote viewers, you can get around 60%.
Yeah.
So that 10% increase means that you're not going to make money really fast, but you will make money.
Yeah.
So people have reported hundreds of thousands of dollars of profit. It takes a while to get there, but that 10% is a real advantage in something like doing stocks or sports betting. So that's an application now that basically came out of the government espionage program.
Yeah.
So at least affiliated with that, because now remote viewing is like a thing that people do.
Yeah.
So that's an application that's probably one of the better known. Of course, others might be things like dowsing.
Yeah.
Especially map dowsing, where you're not in the field, but you're simply looking at a map and saying, here, drill here. And that seems to work too. And then the other gigantic application is healing. A lot of aspects of energy medicine and alternative healing techniques like therapeutic touch and Reiki and so on, those work at a distance too, which means it has a psychic component. It's not just a local thing.
Yeah.
And then the application that earns billions of dollars every year is mediums and psychics.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is somebody making money in this? Yes. What's a little bit different is that when it comes to psychics that you would go to as a therapist, very, very rarely is there any attempt to see whether or not they're actually good at what they do, right? I mean, psychically good. They might be a really good therapist.
Right.
They may or may not be using psychic ability. And the same goes for mediums. Some mediums have been tested. We've done that. We can tell that they're really good because they're getting information that they couldn't get by ordinary means, in which case, if that helps somebody deal with grief or something, then great.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. As far as telekinesis, have you ever seen any good demonstrations of telekinesis, like moving objects or the spoon bending? Do you think that there's legitimacy to that?
Well, given that I did this myself,
wow,
I would say that yes, that this is possible. I did this. This is a heavy soup spoon, pretty big.
Yes.
The reason why I was interested in bending the bowl is because the shell shape is extremely stiff. It's very difficult to bend it. And if you do bend it by force, you're going to crack it here.
Yeah.
Simply because of the brittleness of it. But obviously it's not cracked, it's very smooth. So I think I actually did not believe that was possible before I did it. Even though I had a lot of friends who said that they did it, and they even showed me what they had done. I still don't believe it because it's like it pushes the boggle threshold.
Right.
So I would say then that I've also seen people move little pinwheel things under glass, where it looks like it's not obvious how they would do that other than maybe convection currents, except that they've been far enough away from the little jar. So there's probably not heat differentials that would do it. So I don't know. But for larger scale effects, I would say no. I've never seen anything that I found persuasive.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually recently had Sean McNamara on. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I do know Sean, yes.
Yeah, he has a really cool telekinesis training book, and he's done some really cool demonstrations on his YouTube channel, and I think also on Jeffrey Mishlov's show, he did a demonstration, I believe, just maybe a year ago now. But yeah, that to me, I find fascinating, because that's you're really, I mean, to me, that becomes more convincing now, where you have, physical facts that you can observe. And again, I've seen people do with the, some people call it quantum spoon bending. I guess it's kind of like a, tag name or something. But the spoon bending, where it just becomes like putty. And I've done a few myself, and you just feel it go like rubber, putty, and it's fascinating. And but right, I mean, have there ever been like any good like laboratory experiments with that, where there's been recorded data?
There were, when it first became popular, the spoon bending parties.
Yeah.
So one of the people who initiated that was named Jack Houck. He was an aerospace engineer, and he kept samples of the bending, whether it was a spoon or sometimes a metal rod. And more interestingly, things like hacksaw blades that really don't want to bend.
Yeah.
So he sent them to metallurgists. They did analyses of it. We still don't know how it works. There was some indication that at the site of the bend that the grains in the metal had melted. And you don't need it to actually melt very much in order to create a rubbery feeling to it. Because as in this thing, this part of it felt spongy or like taffy, but the rest of it was hard.
Yeah.
So it was like around the place where I wanted it to bend, that's where something must have happened. And then I just pinched it over and there it was. So we don't know the underlying mechanism, but it probably, I would guess, is starting at a microscopic level. Yeah. And by the way, I had been talking to Sean about the pinwheel thing that he does.
Yeah.
And I asked him to try an experiment where he had the pinwheel and the jar and all that, but evacuated the air to create a vacuum, because of the possibility that the question underneath all of this is, where's the force coming from that's going to do this? So a speculation has been for a long time that the force in this case is actually movement of air, because you think about air inside a bell jar, it's basically just sitting there and sort of molecules are vibrating all over the place, but there's no order to it. Whereas if you can create some order, wind, it would start pushing it around. So, okay, let's take the air out of it and see whether or not there's something impinging on the pinwheel itself. You can't do it. If the air is taken out, it doesn't work. So that's strong evidence, at least a hint of evidence, that we're dealing with something like a manipulation of the existing energies, which I would guess is probably true for all psychokinetic effects. Right. There's nothing coming out of the head like laser beams that are impinging. It's more of an organization of existing energy in a way that it wouldn't normally do. But if you can do that organization, create some kind of vortex or something in the air, well, you can get all kinds of interesting things happening.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That almost reminds me of like Qigong in a sense, right, where, they actually in Taoism, they actually work with the elements, so that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
And I kind of, and for people listening, I think Jack Hawk, I don't know, Jack Hawk, I believe he still has a website up, where there's a website with some of his information and data. So if people are interested in Jack Houck, I'd highly recommend you look him up, because he had done fascinating work. Yeah. And in one,
he passed away a couple of years ago, but
right,
his website is still there. And you're right, there's actually quite a few reports on it and descriptions of the parties that he held, and he kept track of it pretty well. He was an engineer, so he was all about data.
And also in John Alexander's most recent book, which was published, I believe, in 2016 or so, called Reality Denied, there's some talk about that. And in the appendix, I believe there's a whole section dedicated to the spoon bending parties with John Alexander and Jack Houck. And again, fascinating stuff. And Jack Houck, in some way, I believe, if we want to circle into this, was somehow involved in the UFO subject. at least indirectly by the people that he was associated with. Actually in one of John Alexander's book, he talked about the Advanced Working Physics Group.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a group they organized to study, UAP or UFOs. And yeah, Jack Houck, I believe, was part of that group, John Alexander and a few other people. And, so to get into the UAP subject now a little bit, I had heard that, I knew you were involved with IONS, the Institute for Noetic Sciences, which that was founded by Dr. Edgar Mitchell.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And
1973.
Wow, what really? I'm like, for some reason I thought he founded it later. Wow.
No, we're coming up on our 50th anniversary soon.
Wow. Oh, congratulations. That's somehow you guys made it into a Dan Brown book about conspiracies. I was reading that and I was like, what? Like Edgar Mitchell, this guy was like such a great man. And this is just a side note. I'm sorry. I just have to put this in there because I thought it was funny that in one of the Dan Brown's book, they're talking about IONS as some kind of secret organization. I don't know. Just kind of a random
note.
You're
talking about the Lost Symbol.
Yeah.
Which now is a TV series.
It actually looks like a pretty good series.
Yeah. So we spoke to the writers of that series. They wanted to see like, well, what is it really like to do what you do? So we gave them a lot of suggestions and described the kinds of things that we do. I think none of which will actually show up on the show.
Right. Yeah.
Because TV requires outlandish, amazing things, and while we enjoy what we're doing, generally the results are not suitable for TV. Right? Most scientists are people sitting in front of a desk for 10 hours a day. That's about it.
So I thought that was really funny. I don't know why. I'm thinking like this is like, I don't know. So I had heard that I read it somewhere. Maybe it was on one of the websites that you were somehow involved with the Free organization, which became the Edgar Mitchell Foundation, which is with Ray Hernandez, Dr. Rudy Shields, and quite a few other people. Well, so how are you involved with that group?
Ray contacted me and asked if I would be an advisor. And the reason is that while I've orbited around people involved in the UFO world for a long time, so I've heard many stories, but you can only study so much. I mean, every discipline, you spend all of your time just keeping up with the nature of the discipline itself. So I was interested in this particular case because, as Ray has pointed out, notions about consciousness and especially psychic phenomena are just saturated in the UFO lore, right? People meet an alien of some type. They don't talk to them. They have some kind of telepathic report. That's like from the very beginning of abduction cases or contact cases. That's the way it's been. And in addition, even now that reports, even good videos of UFOs, they seem to be aware of what the viewer is looking at. So it was suggesting that there's some kind of mental connection or something or observation. So the notion that some mystery about consciousness is related to this phenomenon, even more so as described by Jacques Vallée and others who I know fairly well and have talked to them many times. It looks like the two mysteries are related in some way.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly how. And this is partially because we don't even know exactly what consciousness is at this point. So it's hard to say exactly how they fit together, other than to say that, and I think what may be going on is that that UFO phenomena are halfway between objective and subjective. So some have called this the imaginal world. It's like the world of imagination is partially purely subjective. It's inside your head, but it's also not completely inside your head. There are aspects of it which somehow bleed out and affect the world at large, including that other people can see it or experience it. So this is, of course, speculation because we don't really know, but it looks like in a lot of cases, psychic phenomena do live in that middle world.
Yeah.
Imaginal World. And UFOs do as well, because they behave more in some cases like an imagination rather than something physical. They have characteristics of both. So this is speculation because we don't know how to get a UFO in the lab and start monkeying with it. I mean, maybe somebody,
as far as we know, right? Yeah,
yeah,
officially.
somebody somewhere may have something in a, that's what movies are always telling us. Whether that's true or not, I don't know.
Yeah. Even Jacques Vallée's newest book, Trinity, talks about a retrieval. And, Vallée said, listen, people have criticized me for not touching the crash retrieval subject, and they're right. And he spent years researching that case. And it was really interesting to see how Vallée came to address the crash retrieval subject. That was just fascinating. And if anybody's interested, the book is called Trinity. I would also recommend that. And my own suspicion is that UAP or UFO intelligence has the ability to operate in both worlds. That would be my speculation. Like they can operate in the physical world just as well as they can operate in the psychic realms. Again, that's my own speculation.
Yeah, and it may be that there actually are not two worlds. That our notion
exactly.
of physicality has dramatically changed over the last century. Yes. And if you look at quantum mechanics, like quantum information science at this point, it's very, very strange. It is not like the physical world of everyday reality. It's almost imaginal at this point. Right. It's abstract. And yet
from like
from that abstraction emerges the everyday world that people experience. But it's not a different world. It's it's the same world somehow. So I could easily imagine that an advanced civilization, probably not more than even 1,000 years ahead of us, of which from our position in the galaxy, there should be saturated with other intelligences closer to the center of the galaxy. They would have easily found by then, 1,000 years, ways to manipulate what we see as reality. But it's not really changing reality. It's using it in ways that we're just beginning to get a glimpse of at this point, but they would already have a much better idea about it. So they'd be able to flip into our reality and flip out and do all kinds of things that would look completely like magic to us, which is why it's so difficult for people to believe in it.
Yeah.
And of course, it immediately raises other questions, like if these UFOs are so smart, why are they crashing all the time?
Yeah.
How do we even begin to understand something like that? How can you shoot down something which is 1,000 years ahead of where we are? So you can say, well, imagine somehow we take a modern armored brigade, send them backwards into the time of the Vikings. Are some of those soldiers going to be killed? Yeah, probably, even just accidentally by a bow and arrow or something. So it's conceivable that even very advanced technology could make a mistake, could be hit by a missile or something, and could crash.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's 10,000 years ahead of us or 1,000,000 years, there's no way in the world it's going to crash unless it was intentional.
Right, exactly. And that's another question. Some people have speculated that some of this alleged technology that humans may be in possession of off-world vehicles, as quoted by Dr. Eric Davis, may be gifts or I can't begin to speculate what their intentions are, but that they were purposely placed there. Some have said something about an archaeological dig where one of these objects was found fully intact. So there are stories like that. And again, that's something we're going to have to wait and see if there's any validity to, which I don't know if that would ever come out if it was legitimate, but is interesting. But to me, I really, the UFO subject is fascinating to me because it's where the rubber meets the road, even for, psychic phenomenon, because you have something that's very tangible as far as we can tell, occur. So there's a physiological component along with psychic phenomenon. So I think that's like a big eye opener for a lot of people. But so you've heard of contact stories, and Dr. J. Allen Hynek talked about high strangeness, and there's something, it has the part of the labeling has a stigma because of certain caricatures, and that it is what it is. But there's a terminology that's more recent from the 1990s called CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind. Mm-hmm. Again, I think it's even more controversial, not in the actual nature of it, but because of the name it is associated with. So do you know anything about that subject?
Well, I know the stories.
Right.
So
no, I was going to say,
I mean, I don't know what to do with the stories, right? I mean,
okay. So that's exactly what I wanted to ask you. So say it's possible, right? Let's just give a hypothetical. How would you be able to design an experiment around that? Is that possible?
Well, you need something that is both repeatable and on demand.
Right.
And whether it's repeatable or not is maybe it's repeatable and on demand. So Stephen Greer, for example, I don't know if he still does this, but he used to call down the UFOs, right?
Yeah.
Get a large group of people and have intention, and then you can make things happen. That would be a start.
Yeah.
You would have to, anytime you do an experiment like this, you need a control. You need something, and it's difficult in that case to do a control, except maybe not. So you get a very good snapshot or video of the sky, some high resolution video, and sometimes you just bring a group together and they're all reading a book or something. And at other times they're doing whatever ritual is involved in making something come down. And you capture all of this video, and then later you analyze it to find out, is there anything different in what happened in the sky during these two conditions? So that, in principle, should be pretty easy to figure out.
Right.
One proviso or one caution in that sort of thing is, I have a couple of telescopes, and I was looking out at the sky, and I noticed that virtually almost anywhere in the sky that I look for any length of time, like a minute or two, I will see something that looks a lot like a UFO. So they're not UFOs probably, because they're doing what you would expect that a satellite would do. They're very likely to be satellites. They're moving really fast as compared to the stars. I mean, it's not like a slow motion thing. It's just boom. And it's happening at times of the day, like dusk, or just like an hour after dusk, where the sun is still hitting it, and you could see them, and they're everywhere. There's, what is there, 7,000 or 8,000 satellites up there, and they're just saturating the whole sky.
Yeah.
So you'd need something pretty dramatic during the calling down of the UFO, like a satellite that suddenly takes a right angle turn.
Okay, so if you have something like that, because there actually is an excellent video that actually Dr. Stephen Greer has. He's shown it at a few things, but the object comes in like this, it loops like this and speeds up while it's looping like this, and it just like explodes like a ball of light and then completely disappears out of the sky. But he does have a few good videos, but unfortunately he also has a lot of videos that are conventional misidentifications, which doesn't help his cause. But in there's a few good ones. There's another group called Mission Rama who did it for they had the mainstream media in South America come to an event, and they recorded pretty inexplicable video of, again, where objects were moving independently and change rates of speed. Clearly were not conventional aircraft. So say you were able to compile that data, what do you do from there?
Well, what it would do is, if you'd be able to create a plausibility case.
Okay.
That's as far as you can get on it. You'd say that it looks like there's something happening, right? There's a difference between this and this.
Yes.
And then, you set that out for peer review, and people will say, well, did you think of this? Did you think of this? But you'll get all kinds of feedback coming back.
Right.
What you want, of course, is constructive criticism.
Yes.
To say that you can make this better by doing all of these things. So, okay, you do that. So you get better and better evidence, creating a case that there's a thing. And by the way, this is exactly what happened in psychic research too, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there's some kind of telepathic thing going on. Okay, we'll try an experiment, send it out for peer review, you get tons of criticism back, you fix the method, you make it better and better over the years. And so what you can do then is, and what we have done at this point, is make a case that the elementary psychic phenomena are real. As best as anybody can tell at this point, using scientific methods and closing all of the known loopholes, you can say there's a thing there. The next question that somebody would say is, well, what is the thing?
Right.
And there we don't know yet what it is.
Yeah.
So
right.
it'll be exactly the same thing with UFOs. Can you create a CE5 event, essentially?
Right.
The answer could be, yeah, you can create an anomaly which is consistent with what people have reported over years. And people will then say, well, does that mean that there are creatures and things that are the answer is no, we don't know.
Right.
The only way we would know that is to take a next step and have them not only do something funny in the sky, but show up for an appointment.
Yeah,
sit down for an interview. Yeah. That's how you do it.
Yeah. So are you saying that you need something like a white paper or something, and then again to get the positive or constructive criticism and try to build on top of it? Because for people listening to this, I hope that somebody does something like this. I'd be happy to participate. I've personally had some incredible CE5s, which again defy all rational thinking for the most part, right? So there was something going on that was completely inexplicable, witnessed by a number of people, including people who were not, there to see something. They were just pulled in as witnesses saying, you see this, right? And, an event occurred that was magnificent, and clearly some intelligence was, organizing and moving the lights the way they were. And again, it's fascinating. So to me personally, I think that there's a tremendous potential there. And I personally don't have the scientific background. I have the experiential background where if such an event could be recorded somehow, I could participate in a very knowledgeable way. So I'm putting that out there for anybody listening to this. If somebody wants to do a white paper on that, I'm happy to be involved, or any scientists. Dean has basically laid out some very good groundwork based on his experience from psychic phenomenon research, how it can be a similar kind of endeavor possibly. So thank you for that, Dean. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, and a case can be made that having people like yourself who are experiencers, you have a different, and if we imagine the consciousness is related in some way to these phenomena, that you have a different level of openness to the possibility than somebody who has never had such an experience. And that might be important in precipitating such events.
Right. So, and another interesting thing is, like, say you got together a group of people who all had this effect on their caudate nucleus, right? What would happen then? Would there be some kind of an objective event where, people who have a track, maybe even the genetic marker for either psychic phenomenon or UFO encounters, right? The people that were taken for the cohort that was taken for that study, could they produce a higher level of success rate, maybe just based on their experience or whatever factors that are involved because of the genetic marker and or the caudate nucleus connection. So I think these things are fascinating, and for me, I'm ready. Just put me out in the field with anybody, and I'm ready to go. But I think it's one of the reasons I think it's fascinating because, again, you have the alleged UFO or UAP. It's where the rubber meets the road. So if you can record data that's, there's clearly like an object there, right? So I would think that's enticing to maybe scientists because they have to then explain it, right? They have to explain it away of how's this effect occurring.
Well, there's no lack of people who would love to spend full time studying these things.
Yeah.
The lack is funding.
Yeah.
And so, and I don't know of any foundations that systematically give money to study these things. And
Yeah.
in which case, then all that's left are individuals or groups like MUFON and so on that can do the best that they can.
Yeah.
So if you think about the budgets that go into the NSF and NIH and DARPA and all those, we're talking about a huge number of billions of dollars per year.
Yeah.
I know that there are people in those organizations who are interested in things like psychic phenomena and UFOs and so on. They cannot use the money for those purposes. So again, it is partially related to religious fundamentalists who have their fingers on the purse. It is related to people in the national security apparatus who actually don't want this information to be easily available because for reasons that I sort of understand, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the funding doesn't flow, so we don't know, right? So
Yeah.
even as we now know that there was a program in the Pentagon looking at this sort of stuff, and no one should be surprised at that. No one should be surprised that all kinds of weird things are being looked at, but they're in deep black spaces because there are people in the government who, sometimes for legitimate reasons, simply don't want the public to know what is actually happening.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, have you ever seen the ATIP slides?
Yeah.
The briefing slide. So, slide 9 is talking about cognitive human interface. And I had asked Lou Elizondo, what is that? And he said it's basically like your CE5, so ATIP observed contact encounters, the psychic or, psychic component. Mm-hmm. They had observed it in their investigation into the subject, along with many other things that we would consider like magic, objects that are transmedium, objects that can move through solid objects, as well, was recorded. Yeah. And there was some other terminologies that were fascinating on those slides. And again, the biological effects, that was another what Lou Elizondo called the sixth observable. It was kind of, they talked about the 5 observables, and then he said, actually, there's a 6th. It's biological effects. And we know that Dr. Kit Green wrote a paper, or, one of the DIRDs, the Defense Intelligence Reference documents on that. But I don't know if that is actually publicly available due to its nature.
Well, see, so imagine that there are people in all kinds of agencies and departments who are tracking these sorts of things forever. Their concern always is this a threat?
Yeah.
That was the reason why we had the Stargate program, do we have to worry about other countries having some advantage over us? If there was any perception of threat, then it would never be public, because you don't want to let the quote enemy know that you know what they know and all of that.
Yeah,
It's a spy versus spy game. To say nothing of if there's a element of consciousness related to some kind of thing that can violate our airspace, there's no way in the world you're going to make that public. Because of the threat aspect of it. We need to understand that better, what's going on. So I wouldn't be too surprised if there were people in the defense industry who are doing research on these things and may actually even know quite a bit about it, but that is not going to raise to the level of the surface that we know. So I know of cases where people within government know very well about what's going on, at least as far as the psychic component goes. It's all classified way above top secret, and they're not going to reveal it.
Yeah. Well, so there's 3 quick things I want to put together in with that. Is the Wilbur Smith memo from 1952 talking about UFOs being more classified than the hydrogen bomb, which was the ultimate doomsday weapon at the time, and that UFOs involved mental phenomenon. That's fascinating. So that was 1952, the Wilbur Smith memo, which has not been contested. It was an official Canadian document with the scientist Wilbur Smith, who was speaking to scientists in the United States about UFOs. But also the psychic component. In one on the ATIP slide 9, it said something about UAP having the ability, possibly, I don't know, to influence the leaders and decision makers, which was that was pretty fascinating. That was on slide 9. But getting to the threat part, Dr. Hal Puthoff gave a lecture, I believe it was at the SSE in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And he said the actual biggest threat with UAP was that, and for the ATIP program, so the priority was that they were concerned, the United States government and the Pentagon were concerned that another country was going to possibly develop these capabilities before we did. And that was actually the biggest threat that ATIP was trying to address. So that's,
right.
It really seems like, yeah.
Threats will motivate people to give money to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. And I mean, so regarding some of this, the current disclosure stuff, right? Everything that's coming out now, I mean, it's very limited, but it's like, it's like a huge, they're just bringing elephants into the room. They're saying UAP are real. We don't know what they are, but now we have to form a permanent office as of 2022. The recent bill that was put in, that was approved. So they're going to have a permanent UAP office now. That the UAP task force was temporary. It did its job, and they said we need to know more, but we need more funding, and so that's going to happen. Do you think everything is going to remain kind of how it is with everything still remaining classified, or do you think that we're going to see things gradually open up a little bit?
It's very hard to say, because if something interesting is found, it's not going to be public.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So I don't know.
Yeah, they're calling for congressional hearings now too, and
well, those could be behind closed doors too.
Right. Well, so Andre Carson, I think he's the one of the chairs for the Senate Intelligence Committee, said that he wants public hearings. So of course there's going to be classified, no doubt, and then there'll be some kind of public hearing possibly, and then I hope that there's like a fundamental admittance that UAP are something that seems technological. They've recorded the data, and they're not they're not ours per se, right? Meaning not human technology. I think that's probably the most we can hope for, and that's still a big what if. But I think even that kind of acknowledgement would be huge for science, right? I think it would open up a lot of doors and minds and possibilities.
Well, I think as you would probably agree, that if for anybody paying attention to what has already been released, that's like what's new.
Yeah, right.
I mean, so the missing element there, as it is for psychic phenomena just in general, is, well, then how do you explain this? How does this work? How do we fit this in with the rest of what science knows about the way that the world works? In the case of UFOs, it's actually much easier than it is for psychic phenomena, because all you need to say is, well, they're 10,000 years ahead of us. Yeah. So imagine science today on the acceleration curve of new discoveries, 10,000 more years. Virtually anything that such creatures could do would look to us like pure magic. It wouldn't make any sense at all. But that's because we're babes in the woods at this point. We don't know that much.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And all this stuff, I don't think any of it is like undiscoverable by science. Everything that we're seeing and observing, I think we have the potential to explain and understand through science, right? I think that we will learn the science of how remote viewing and these things work eventually. I think the psychic phenomenon is probably the most cutting edge of all sciences. You're talking about when you're getting down to consciousness, again, possibly more fundamental than I don't want to say than matter, but I mean, as far as like a blueprint for the universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the possibilities and and everything there is just, it's mind boggling.
Yeah. So what I try to point out though is that science is based on the philosophy of materialism. Everything is energy and matter, basically. That idea is not going to go away. It's been way too effective. So rather than trying to change science and throw away the textbooks, I would say that what will probably happen is what's happened throughout science, which is that somebody gets an idea and it looks pretty good, but then somebody comes along with something, says, oh, we need to expand our assumptions so that what we used to think was fundamental is actually a special case. So a great example is classical physics. We're not throwing away Newtonian physics. It works. We were able to go to the moon with it. It works really well, but it's not the whole picture. So we expand it a little bit with relativity, and we expand it again with quantum mechanics. The same is going to go here. So materialism as a way of understanding reality will be eventually seen as a useful subset that works within certain constraints. What it doesn't work is when we start considering the idea of subjectivity, consciousness. Then you need a bigger pot in order to be able to accommodate what's going on. That's I mean, in some respects, that all of the founders of quantum mechanics were idealists. They already believed that. That's the way that they were beginning, but it fell out of favor. And then you look at history, there's this cycle that goes back and forth between what do you fundamentally think the world is like? Is it idealism? Is it materialism? It goes back and forth. We're currently in a space of materialism, but that's not going to last forever.
Yeah. And speaking of constraints, I know you got to go, Dean. I really appreciate you coming on. Again, it's an honor. You are one of the most epic psychic researchers of all time. But do you have any parting words, advice, or something you would hope to see in the future for psychic phenomenon research and or even UFO research?
I think it's important to follow your curiosity. So if the curiosity is there, it means that enthusiasm is there. And if there doesn't have to be much money for it, you find friends and create organizations and do it yourself. Yeah. I mean, at this level of the science, say, of not so much psychic phenomena, because we know something now, but especially in the UFO business, we don't know very much about what's going on, at least from public information. So anybody can make a breakthrough. We're at that fun early stage of beginning to understand how things work, where somebody can come up with an idea and figure out a way of testing it and make a breakthrough without having to be at Harvard.
Yeah.
Because the likelihood that the breakthrough will come from Harvard is pretty low.
Right. Yeah.
Not because they're not smart enough to figure it out, but because the organizations that already have a certain image are very jealous about keeping that image, and they don't want to shake it by introducing controversy.
Right. And, look what they did to Dr. John Mack. They tried to crucify the man, and, thankfully it came out in his favor, and people like Danny Sheehan helped him out. And again, I mean, John Mack was another legend where, he really did cutting edge work, and he kind of helped lay some groundwork down, but he took a hit for it.
Yeah. Anybody who challenges the status quo in any domain is going to be attacked.
Yeah.
Par for the course.
So that's a pretty somber note to end our discussion.
Well, but see, some people like that. So there are people who want to be the ones who are blazing the new trail. That's the fun part. Right?
Yeah, right.
And not everybody has the opportunity or the ability to want to challenge the status quo. So if somebody had a large family to support, for example, it would be irresponsible to constantly be challenging the status quo because you're probably going to not have any jobs. So in that case, the responsible thing to do is to take care of your family. And if that means setting aside your real interests, or at least doing it as a hobby, perhaps, then that's what you got to do. So you need a combination of being an iconoclast that doesn't care too much about what other people think, and the ability to actually to express your interests without causing damage to people that are relying on you.
Yeah. Or, or you can be Robert Bigelow.
Yeah. Occasionally you'll have a billionaire come along who has an
Yeah.
interest and they can put money into it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's awesome. Anyways, thank you so much, Dean, for coming on. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate all the work you've done over the years. For people listening, I'm going to have links in the description so you can see Dr. Dean Radin's work. Again, thank you so much for coming on, Dean.
You're welcome.
You take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.